And we are back from break. I'm Aaron Dykes here again on this Friday edition of the Infowars Nightly News. As you know, we've been trying to bring you more and more special coverage of stuff the mainstream media won't touch and stuff that even a lot of our longtime listeners are aware of but may have fallen off the path as far as specific details and putting the bigger picture together. With that in mind, we want to review some of Alex's first film, America Destroyed by Design, from 1997, where he covers the United Nations takeover of U.S. national parks and wildlife land, as well as parks throughout the entire world. It's all part of the larger Agenda 21 United Nations biosphere takeover, where they're going to move populations away from those areas into concentrated cities and really restrict that usage for kind of the international scientific community's discretion. There are executive orders we're going to cover involving that. There's specific national monuments and World Heritage sites designated by UNESCO we're going to cover, and a whole lot more. The list is exhaustive. We're going to touch upon a lot of that tonight, but first, let's check out a clip from Alex's 1997 film.
Our story starts in southern Arizona, where the UN is taking over. Just look at the size of this beautiful organ pipe cactus. And the biggest concentration of these in the world is now part of this 500,000 acre UN UNESCO environmentalist biosphere. Has nothing to do with the environment. It has to do with control of resources. Gorgeous. Just look at it. Look at the size of that thing. It's got to be, what, 40 feet tall? You're looking at the certificate of ownership of our national parks. So they started the precedent way back in 1968, and by 1976, the Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument was beginning to come under international control under the guise of environmentalism. But in 1996, you'll find teeth were added. Now we're fixing to go inside the main visitor center and talk to the head ranger and find out if he's aware of this massive loss of U.S. sovereignty. Have you seen this photograph right here? And I called Bruce Babbitt's office and talked to some of their people, and they told me that that was true. At Mammoth Cave, United Nations, a World Heritage Site, an International Biosphere Reserve, and they said, well, yes, and we took it down because people didn't like it. See, y'all don't have that, and y'all never did. And that's the funny part. They only did it in certain parts of the country, and now they've taken the signs down. But you do have this plaque, don't you? You said you have a brass plaque? Just like that one?
Right. Well, parks have to respond to the local community, and I suppose people in the local community objected to those signs. And they complied with them by taking down the sign.
But they did not take down the international order.
It's not a requirement that they have the sign in the first place.
I got you.
So in order to be accommodating, they went along with the local community. You know, we don't have a sign, so it must not be required.
Got you. Well, thanks a lot, sir. Appreciate that. Ranger David
DeWitt.
David DeWitt. Thank you, sir. Here we are at the Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument at the Park Ranger's office. And he told us that he didn't see a problem with the international designation. But he did have to admit, why are they taking down the UN signs but leaving the executive order there? See, they're taking away the contracts from in front of your face so you don't see what's happening. But then they're just continuing with their plans right here. United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, Program on Man and Biosphere.
Now, these clips are, there's a lot of clips. Alex confronts a lot of parks. We're going to play them again in a minute where they begin to harass Alex. Now, what you're looking at is a international United Nations-based takeover of these lands through many layers. There are a lot of different agreements that factor into this. It's not just the Man and Biosphere program, although notice the rather occultic Egyptian Ankh that's been integrated into that logo. I don't know if you can see that now on the overhead screen here, Man and Biosphere program. But Alex does confront those signs at these UNESCO-held World Heritage Park sites and other important places. There's about 20 of those, and then there's another 47 biosphere-restricted sites. But there are other sites, too, as we're going to get into. But first, let's play another clip from America Destroyed by Design.
At Mammoth Cave, too, and then one, too.
Yes, they had UN signs there, didn't they?
Right, yeah. Well, they just put those in, though.
They just put the United Nations...
Well, they had one in before, but they're moving them. I don't know, how recently have you been there? 'Cause they were redoing the entranceway, and they're going to put them in a different spot.
We were there about 3 months ago.
Okay, so they probably are pretty much moved, I would think. Because I left, like, 4 months ago.
I have just a question for you. And I know this isn't a policy question. It's just a question of other things. Why do we need the United Nations to put up its signs and to help us oversee our own national parks?
They're not necessarily overseeing our own national parks. Part of what the Biosphere Reserve does, especially in Kentucky, is that it's not for the park, it's for the area outside the park.
Now stop the tape right there. I stopped the tape right there because she said something very important. The United Nations designation over that park is not so much necessarily the park itself as for the land around it. That's because they have the core protected areas, but they also have other areas where they have restricted usage for humans and a further zone that they can restrict if they choose, if they deem that protected area to be in danger for a wide variety of reasons. There's a lot of tyranny that can open up through these layers of designation zones. That's something Michael Kaufman's covered too. We're going to get more into that. Play the clip again.
Parks. Part of what the Biosphere Reserve does, especially in Kentucky, is that it's not for the park, it's for the area outside the park.
Yes, but
so
are you familiar with the executive orders setting up a precedent for world governorship of world parks? And
I've heard bits and tabs, but I haven't read enough about it to say in particular.
But you have seen the UN signs?
Yeah.
But they're not here. See, that's funny though. This park is under that, but they don't put the signs out. I think if it's such a thing of pride that we're getting into the international community, we ought to put the signs out.
Right. Well, those symbols don't have anything to do with how the park runs. That's just a designation just an honorary title, basically.
Oh, it's honorary to go to UN insignia.
Yeah, but it's not anything. It helps us maybe get some grants with research and things like that, but that's all it does. It doesn't help control the park in any way.
You mean international money coming in doesn't affect the way the parks would be run?
It's for research and things like that. How does that affect the park?
Well, how it affects it is researchers give recommendations to the parks and to the states, locales, and the federal government.
Right.
And by doing that, they are paying the researchers. That's the key. That's the keystone. That's the Trojan horse. Then they will give the information that the people. You probably heard the term. If you want a survey, you can pay for whatever you want. You tell them what you want to survey.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
Because I really support the parks. I just feel like that I see too much big. I mean, I don't even mean corporations. I mean super old money banks in Europe and other places are really out for big land grabs, and they're instituting the policies. We're hearing it in the universities. It's almost fascistic measures sometimes. Is there anybody that I can, who will just tell me the same thing you did, but just where I can have a mic on and things?
Well, we have a public affairs officer right here.
Well, you heard me just ask him to just politely talk to public affairs officer. We were sitting down for about 10 minutes with our cameras off and barely got a shot of her. That's why we had to freeze it. We only got about a half a second of her. She was very rude and drugged me to the back and threatened to arrest me for dare to ask questions. Was I some type of terrorist? And you should have seen the monster they had in the back with us. This is all part of America. Yes, if you ask questions, you must be some type of weirdo. Now there you have a World Heritage Site sign, one of the 2 UN designations that the Grand Canyon has. And under these, I've already told you many times, the Executive Order 12,986, which turns over control to the international community as collateral on the national debt. I want to make a point. All the rangers and people we talked to up to the point at the office were very kind and polite and helpful. It was only the bigwigs, and they openly told us behind closed doors that they had heard about types like us that were asking questions about the UN. We have to be watched.
And there you have it. Alex got himself in trouble with those little petty bureaucrats over asking questions about the United Nations. But what are we talking about here with these biosphere programs and the rest of it? We have a few articles to help point to that. The first, I believe, is Man and the Biosphere Program off of UNESCO's website, defining the program that started in 1971, 40 years out now. And it's an intergovernmental scientific program aiming to set a scientific basis for the improvement of the relationships between people and the environment globally. Sounds nice and friendly and like they want to protect wildlife By the way, the UNESCO founder, Julian Huxley, worked with Prince Philip and Prince Bernhard, the Bilderberg founder, and also a member of the Nazi Party to fund the World Wildlife Fund, which also works in concert with these groups. Now, who owns our biospheres and World Heritage sites? This is an article from Michael S. Kaufman, PhD. He's pretty much the leading figure when it comes to the takeover of American lands based on biological diversity. He first found out when he attended the Convention on Biological Diversity and really began to uncover the bankers' plan behind this takeover. You saw him in an Endgame, and I refer you to that for even more information on the Agenda 21 takeover and the attempt to confine human activity. But among other things, he says one only has to look at the Champlain Adirondack Biosphere Reserve in Vermont and New York to see how this would work. A parallel concept has actually been implemented since 1972 with the Adirondack State Park by New York State. Instead of the robust, thriving communities promised in U.S. MAB literature, that's Man in the Biosphere program, the Adirondack economy has been devastated, culture and much of the infrastructure frozen in time, and the people repressed by a communal feudal land tenure structure where a non-elected, non-represented, NGO-controlled Adirondack Park Agency develops and enforces arbitrary and capricious regulations across multiple countries. And he gets into that after explaining how, yes, the United States did constitutionally agree to the World Heritage Treaty in 1972, as misguided as it may have been, as the Senate has powers over international treaties, but Congress never passed any law related to UNESCO's International Biosphere Program, which began its first convention back in 1968, if I'm not mistaken. So basically, through executive orders and complicity in our own government, we have signed on to this international management, and yet it still affects us all. Now, in this article, United Nations Biosphere Reserve Land Grabs, published by Spy Witness News back in September 2009, it just highlights a little of the things that you may find off-putting about United Nations control. For instance, what do the Statue of Liberty, Independence Hall, and Monticello have in common? What about the Great Smoky Mountains, Yellowstone Park, and the Grand Canyon? Would it surprise you to learn that every one of these unique American landmarks is also controlled by the United Nations? And it gets into more detail about the 72 World Heritage Treaty and the 68 UNESCO Biosphere Conference. It's amazing but true. Every one of the natural and historic treasures listed above, plus more than a dozen more in America, has been designated an official World Heritage Site by the United Nations Education, Scientific, and Culture Organization, UNESCO, headquartered in Paris, France. And there's a map just of those 20-some-odd World Heritage Sites. There's another 47 MAB Biosphere Reserve directory. But that is not all. There is also the International Union for Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources Organization, who put together the United Nations list of protected areas. This one is printed from 1997. They've been compiling this list since the early 60s and working on the biosphere designation since 1959 through various United Nations holding subcommittees. Now, this 1997 report lists about 12,000 protected sites throughout the world, including many in the United States. That's what's printed in this manual. And just for instance, I'll turn to Texas since I am familiar with many of those locations. And they get into all the different protected areas, and it is not just national parks. It also includes national forest. It includes national grasslands, natural landmarks, national parks, of course, in this case, Big Bend and Guadalupe Mountains National Parks. It includes national preserves. It includes national recreation areas. It includes national scenic rivers. It includes national seashores, such as the Padre Island National Seashore, really a very large area. It also includes the national wildlife refuges in Texas and all the other states listed here. It includes state natural area reserves and at least a dozen state parks, including near to Austin, the Bastrop State Park, Pedernales Falls State Park, and the others on this list. It also includes Wilderness Forest Service area.